The enormous benefits that will accrue as a result of Christianity being true just outweigh any costs associated with it, far more than naturalism, which has virtually no great benefit accruing to it. For example, that Odin or Zeus might turn out to be the true God. The probability of that is so utterly negligible that these can be safely ignored and the argument will not be impaired.
You're about to witness one of the strangest defences William Lane Craig has ever made. In trying to dismiss the many gods objections to Pascal's wager, he doesn't answer the question carefully. Instead, he leans on a series of fallacies and rhetorical tricks that make his position seem stronger than it actually is. As just stated, William Lane Craig is asked to respond to the many gods objections to Pascal's wager. Essentially, the objection points out that the options aren't just atheism or Christianity. There are many different religions: Islam, Hinduism, ancient mythology where they worship Zeus or Odin, and many other theistic beliefs. The question is, if we're using this wager to decide which god to believe in, why do we ignore all of the other options? Doesn't their existence complicate things? Craig's first objection is as follows.
If the alternatives are so improbable, they can be safely ignored. For example, that Odin or Zeus might turn out to be the true God. The probability of that is so utterly negligible that these can be safely ignored and the argument will not be impaired.
The first fallacy that Craig commits of the video is begging the question, also known as circular reasoning. Begging a question occurs when someone already assumes the conclusion that they're trying to prove, essentially reasoning in a circle. For example, imagine someone says the universe must be designed by God because it shows signs of being designed. Here, the conclusion, the universe must be designed by God, is assumed in the premise it shows signs of a design. The way that Craig does it is he presents other gods as utterly negligible.
The probability of that is so utterly negligible
without providing any evidence as to why Christianity is more likely. The next fallacy that Craig commits is a straw man fallacy. A straw man occurs when someone misrepresents or oversimplifies an argument to make it easier to attack. For example, imagine someone said, people who want healthier school meals only want their children to eat kale. That's a straw man. The original argument is about healthier meals, not just kale. How Craig commits it, he reduces the many gods objections to just Zeus and Odin, ignoring the full range of serious religious alternatives like Islam, Hinduism, or modern theistic beliefs. By picking the weakest or most fantastical rivals, he makes the objections seem trivial. The next fallacy that Craig commits is called dismissive rhetoric, also known as loaded language. Dismissive rhetoric occurs when someone uses language that seems authoritative or certain to stop argument. For example, someone says, "That's a ridiculous question. Obviously, it doesn't matter." They haven't explained why it doesn't matter, they just assert it. The way that Craig demonstrates it is by using words like utterly negligible and safely ignored, giving the impression that alternatives have already been proven wrong, rather than actually demonstrating it.
The other response would be if you can use rational argument and evidence to reduce the alternatives to a tractable number, like 2 or 3 or 4, then you can run the argument just using those alternatives.
The next fallacy that Craig commits is begging the question. Once again, he assumes the very thing that he's trying to prove, that Christianity is correct while dismissing all other religions. He presents no evidence as to why other religions could be safely ignored, hence reasoning in a circle. The following fallacy he commits is a special pleading fallacy. Special pleading is when someone applies a standard to others but exempts themselves, or their preferred outcome, without justification. Imagine someone says, "Everyone must obey the law, except me, because I'm special." They're unfairly exempting themselves from the standard. Craig engages in special pleading when he assumes that Christianity will pass the rational argument and evidence test, while he actively dismisses all other religions. No neutral criteria is provided, and the method is structured around his outcome being preferred.
And I think that for Pascal himself, he believed that the alternatives basically came down to Christianity or naturalism.
The fallacy that Craig commits here is a false dichotomy. A false dichotomy occurs when someone assumes that there's only two options when more are possible. Imagine someone says, "You're either with me or against me," when other positions are possible. Craig reduces the vast selection of philosophical and theological options for God to just two options: Christianity or naturalism. By doing this, he makes it seem like these are the only two options that are viable.
Although Pascal believed that belief in God is properly basic, he was an enormous fan of Christian evidences. And there are portions of the Pensée that contain arguments for the resurrection of Jesus that read like Gary Habermas or some other evidentialist.
The first fallacy that Craig commits is an appeal to authority and name dropping. An appeal to authority occurs when someone only believes something because a respected authority believes it. For example, someone says, "This is the best diet I could possibly have because a famous doctor said so," even though the doctor's opinion doesn't prove it scientifically. Craig commits an appeal to authority by citing Pascal's admiration for Christian evidences. He suggests that these authorities validate Christian viability over alternatives. But the truth of Christian claims depend on the merits of the arguments themselves, not the historical or modern reputation of others. The final fallacy in this segment that Craig commits is a misleading analogy. A misleading analogy occurs when someone implies that two things are more closely related than they actually are. For example, saying my grandfather was a good businessman, therefore I will succeed in tech. The relevance isn't there. Craig commits a misleading analogy when he claims that Pascal's reasoning was similar to that of Gary Habermas, a more modern theist. So the analogy does not justify them as being directly comparable.
And so I think for Pascal, he thought that basically the choice was going to be between naturalism and Christianity. And when you compare those two, as I said in the response to Kyle, then it is just so clear that the enormous benefits that will accrue as a result of Christianity being true just outweigh any costs associated with it, far more than naturalism, which has virtually no great benefit accruing to it if it's true.
The first fallacy that Craig commits is a loaded comparison / false dichotomy. As already stated before, a false dichotomy is when two options are given when more exist. Craig does it by comparing Christianity and naturalism in a way that makes Christianity seem overwhelmingly better, while reducing naturalism to having virtually no real benefits, ignoring the actual benefits that naturalism provide. The second fallacy that Craig commits is an appeal to consequences. An appeal to consequence occurs when someone says that something must be a certain way because if not, something would be bad or something would be good. For example, someone might say, "You must believe in luck, otherwise life would be too harsh," implying the truth depends on desirable outcomes. Craig does it by claiming that Christianity leads to enormous benefits, while naturalism doesn't. The argument focuses on the outcomes of the belief, rather than whether the belief is justified. The third and final fallacy of this segment and the video is downplaying the opponent. Downplaying the opponent occurs when someone trivializes or misrepresents the opposing position. For example, someone says, "Your argument for climate change is cute. It doesn't really matter." Craig does this by reducing naturalism to having virtually no benefit, ignoring the actual value and philosophical reasoning behind it, making it seem weak.